In 2005, Resident Evil 4 was developed and published by Capcom Studios to continue the Resident Evil franchise. The brilliant mind behind the game, Shinji Mikami, took a lot of risks with the game that could have potentially destroyed the franchise entirely. But fortunately, his creative vision paid off massively, as Resident Evil 4 was not only universally accepted as the best Resident Evil game, but one of the best video games ever made. Even if you prefer the more horror-focused titles, it's hard to ignore how influential Resident Evil 4 was, not only to horror games, but to the entire gaming industry. However, despite the great accomplishment that RE4 was, success brought its own fair share of problems to Capcom. Since most fans considered RE4 to be almost perfect, there really wasn't a clear path to take for a sequel, since less or more of already established elements from RE4 could have ruined it. And with Shinji Mikami gone, they really didn't have a clear vision either. Eventually, in 2009, Capcom released Resident Evil 5, a game that not only was considered disappointing, but also was marked by most fans as the point of downfall for the Resident Evil franchise.
Resident Evil 5.
As a child, Resident Evil 5 was the first Resident Evil game I ever played. 10-year-old me really loved Resident Evil 5. Honestly, I considered it to be one of the best games I ever played. It wasn't until years later that I realized how flawed it actually was. Apparently, Capcom's solution to making RE5 better than RE4 was to copy and recycle everything that made RE4 unique and make it worse. Playing the game now, it's painfully obvious how many things they took from RE4, from the atmosphere all the way to the actual gameplay mechanics. I could go on and on with the parallels, but I think everyone knows them all by now. But honestly, I don't even mind these similarities all that much. But it's the way that they're executed. In RE4, treasure was scattered around the map. Sometimes you had to complete side puzzles to get them, and sometimes you had to look around for alternative paths. These treasures could be sold to the merchant for cash, that you could have used to buy or upgrade guns or inventory size. Since the game had a very complex and satisfying inventory system, upgrading it would feel very satisfying and rewarding, therefore encouraging the players to look for treasure. But in RE5, treasure is mostly just enemy drops, and can rarely be something you have to go out of your way to find. The inventory system was just straight up a downgrade in every possible way. Only 9 slots that you can never upgrade. And the merchant was completely removed and replaced with a shop menu at the end of each mission. While RE5 has bigger issues than this, it's ultimately things like these that make it all worse. It's as if Capcom tried to copy RE4 without fully understanding what made it great to begin with. Usually I would talk about the story first, but since this is a Resident Evil game, the story doesn't even matter all that much. It's the gameplay that really matters. And finally, I have some good things to say about this game. RE5's gameplay is decent, pretty good even I would say. The combat is just as satisfying as RE4 and even improved in certain parts. The controls are pretty fun and though still clunky, an improvement over RE4. But overall, nothing special to really talk about here. But I have to say this about the tone of the game. It's been already said a million times, so I'll make it short. RE5 is way more action focused than horror. In fact, there is barely any horror or puzzle elements in the game. With horror and puzzles being the main appeal of Resident Evil games, I can definitely see why so many people hate this game. But personally, in this case, I didn't really mind it that much. You could make the argument that I'm biased since I grew up with RE4 and RE5, and you'd probably be right. But I also loved RE2 Remake, even though it wasn't the style I grew up with. So ultimately, I enjoyed RE5's gameplay, whether it was because of the nostalgia I had, or because I had a friend on my side to keep me company. There is a reason why most Resident Evil games don't have co-op. As fun as it would be to play something like RE4 co-op, it would totally take you out of the atmosphere. So naturally, Resident Evil games and co-op don't go together very well. But in the case of RE5, that's different. From the things I said so far and you most likely heard so far, you could piece together that RE5 is far from the average Resident Evil experience. So co-op doesn't hurt it like it would to the other Resident Evil games. But what's the reason behind this big change anyway? For the most part, the only parts that actually use co-op are certain doors that require a partner to pass.
Come on, Chris! Come on, Chris! Chris! Hurry up! Come on! Hurry up, Chris!
Oh my god, shut the f-
Which is kind of a letdown, since this feels more like an excuse than a reason. Still though, you're definitely better off playing with a friend than the AI. I can't explain it, but something about RE5 co-op leads to a lot of fun and memorable moments.
Do your calculations and move it the opposite of my direction. Oh my god, you're so dumb!
So if you ever plan on playing through the game, do yourself a favor and bring a friend along if you have one. It is how the game is meant to be played after all. Wesker has a crush on Rebecca Chambers, but Ixana
Yeah.
is way more attractive than Rebecca Chambers.
Rebecca Chambers looks like a baby.
Oh no.
Oh no.
Oh no.
Oh no.
Oh no.
Oh no.
If you took the word badass and made it into a human being, you would have Albert Wesker. Wesker is a delight in this game, the perfect villain and honestly a big part of why I like the game. I love how confident and powerful he is. He treats the characters like we are nothing to worry about the entire game, and even though that's pretty cliche, I still love the vibes that he gives. His dialogue sounds so demeaning and funny. At his core, Wesker is an average mustache-twirling villain, which I would usually hate in any other game or movie. But since the story is pretty flawed and goofy, he becomes very likable. Every time he is on screen is a highlight of the game, and it also helps that his boss fight, in my opinion, is one of the best in the franchise. Oh, and speaking of boss fights, the boss fights in RE5 are pretty decent. It's the usual Resident Evil formula of running around and slowly shooting at the weak points. Pretty fun in my opinion. But there are some standouts. The fight with the El Gigante is really terrible. Way worse than the one in RE4. And the Bat Mutant was a bit too easy for my taste. But both Wesker fights are really great in their own way. In the first one you just have to stall for time and run around, since you stand no chance against them. And that sounds pretty bad in concept, but it's actually very fun and enjoyable.
Oh! Oh my god! Oh my god! What the fuck was that?
The second one though, it's my favorite boss fight in the entire franchise. Wesker can dodge bullets very easily, so you can't hurt him that way. Since his powers weaken his vision, we have to turn off all the lights to give ourselves the edge. Then someone has to go distract him as the other person finds a rocket, then we reload it together, and then in the right moment, we shoot him with a rocket launcher. Which doesn't kill him. He straight up catches it with his hands. After shooting it there is a very tight window to go behind him and grab him, and for the other person to run up to him and inject him with the serum. A pretty cool fight that actually uses co-op pretty well, since you need full teamwork for the fight. And that's not even the end. After following him to his plane, we crash into a volcano. And then, he becomes his most powerful form. We pretty much have to empty every bit of resource we have onto him until he dies. But he still isn't dead. After that, we shoot him with 2 rocket launchers, while he is burning in lava, and then he finally goes down. Jesus. Jokes aside, this fight really lets you know how powerful Wesker is. And it's a satisfying conclusion to the story, since he's been pulling the strings ever since the first game, but never got his demise. The replay value in RE5 is actually pretty high. After finishing the game, you can unlock infinite ammo versions for your favorite guns, and play any chapter with any difficulty that you want. And as extra modes go, Mercenaries is there along with a few DLCs. But my favorite is the Versus mode. It's so terrible, but I recommend if you ever plan on playing Resident Evil 5, definitely play the Versus mode. It's just better if I show you.
Intense PvP.
Intense gameplay.
That is some insane gunplay, man. Intense PvP gameplay. No, I'm fucking burning. Oh my god! No! The most intense battle. Battle of gods. Why don't you die? Die! Die! Oh my god, he's gonna hit some women. Yes!
I'm gonna put that in the video. Hey there. For the outro, I've decided to go unscripted to be more genuine and honest. And this video is kind of a mess. At the beginning I talk all serious, and when it gets to the middle and near the end, it gets funnier. It's kind of a mess in tones. And honestly, that's kind of Resident Evil 5 in a nutshell. Resident Evil 4 knew the tone it was going for. It was goofy, but occasionally badass. But RE5 is a mix of an average action movie, sometimes it's goofy, not consistent tone-wise. And the game is definitely flawed. I'm not gonna sit here and pretend that it's a perfect game or it's misunderstood. It has its fair share of flaws. But still, overall, even though it's not a good representation of what a Resident Evil game is supposed to be, it's a very fun experience, especially with a friend. And I think everyone should at least play it once or twice every now and then. So whenever you and your friends got around, go play Resident Evil 5 Versus. As fun as it is, you're still probably better off playing Resident Evil 4 anyway.